Good morning. I'm David. Welcome to the Big 4-0 of 52 churches in 52 weeks. If this is your first time here, this is a one-year spiritual march as we attend a new church each week. So if you want to join along on this yellow brick road of intentional church hopping, make sure to like and subscribe. I always appreciate the support. So for this week, I was curious, what does a church in Kansas look like? When it comes to Kansas, all I think of is The Wizard of Oz, Smallville with Clark Kent, and the Kansas Jayhawks. So when I was researching churches, I came across Beecher Bible and Rifle Church. And at first, I was like, what in the Second Amendment kind of name is that? But when I looked into the history on this, it's actually quite fascinating. This was a church that was set up right before the Civil War kicked off to fight against slavery. They did all the different kinds of things and was a participating church in the Underground Railroad to help slaves free and escape. So but why Bible and Rifle? There was no website. Their Facebook page has been dormant for 8 years. And they had 2 phone numbers that were both disconnected. So as a last-ditch effort, just to even see if it was worth making this drive, I called a third number and I got a gentleman, fantastic heart for this guy. He told me in our conversation he was 90 years old. And all I remember, and I may be exaggerating a bit on this, but I just remember him continually saying, yeah, come to service, 10 a.m. We have church at 10 a.m. Walking in, I have never been greeted by the sight of something more shocking as I did with this church. And also, if you've been following my church journey, you'll know I have this strange aspect with cardinal appearances. And at the conclusion of this service, I had quite a number of sightings that I'll touch base on later. But first, here's what it looked like inside with worship, and I'll be back in a minute or so with some insights. So we're not in Kansas anymore. I had to say it. But 10 a.m. was stuck in my head when I was driving over. And I had seen on Google, they had photos of the church sign that said service started at 9:45. So what was it? So by the time I got there, it was about 9:50, 9:55. And as I stepped out of my Jeep, I could hear the piano playing inside. I could hear people singing. It's like, it wasn't 10 a.m. So I opened up the door, walked through their small little narthex area with a bunch of photos, and I walked to the right and had to open up a door. So I opened up the door, and to my surprise, I'm greeted by the sight of 2 German shepherds. Their ears pointed up and turned towards me when I walked in. And I'm like, that is not Toto. They had the black fur coats with the ears. I had thought at first they were Dobermans. So I know Dobermans, they can be quite aggressive and ferocious if they're not properly trained. So that was my first thought. And I'm just like, what? Like, beware of dog. Like, what kind of Bible and Rifle Church is this? But the strange thing is, like, stained glass window glow was shining on one of them. And then there was about 12 people in the congregation. They were all singing. They were perfectly content. The dogs, they didn't bark. They didn't come towards me. So I could tell pretty early on, right, that they were going to be very well trained. But I tell you, the shock of seeing that walking into a church, I have never experienced something like that before. So where did the name Beecher Bible and Rifle Church come from? Well, the history on this church is actually quite prominent in American history. In the 1850s, the United States government was looking to expand west with the Transcontinental Railroad. But the problem was there was a huge debate regarding slavery. So if Kansas would become a state, would it be a free state like the North, or would it be a slave state like the South? So they introduced the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854 that essentially put the issue into the hands of a popular vote. So that forced a race for people to settle into the state so that they could become citizens. One of these groups that decided to move out west was a group from New Haven, Connecticut, who were heavily influenced by the preaching of Henry Beecher. Beecher was a prominent preacher at this time that often preached about God's love, but also was very anti-slavery. Even his sister wrote the book Uncle Tom's Cabin, which was an anti-slavery book that really got that topic sparked in debate. So this group moved out west to Kansas, about 70 people. But one of the problems that they had was how were they going to defend themselves if they got into conflict with those in Missouri? So what they introduced and what the church did is the thought was if these Missourians, if these ruffians cause issue, if they don't listen to God's word, maybe they'll listen to a rifle. So they got it set up where 25 rifles would be sent on top of Bibles. So they put it in a crate and called it Beecher's Bibles. So they sent it out so that way this colony could defend themselves if conflict broke out. And sure enough, this was a time period called Bleeding Kansas. So there were a lot of civil confrontations, a lot of bloodshed that eventually would spark the Civil War. But what happened during the Civil War is they were able to build this church right before that really got started, and they would participate in the Underground Railroad. So for slaves that were trying to escape, they could basically be housed within this county so that they could become free. I found a seat towards the front, and there are only about a dozen people here. A lady came up to me. I think she was kind of the caretaker of the church, and she showed me where they were in the hymnals so I could follow along. And I tell you, 19th century type of churches, I have a certain fondness now after being a part of this, just because it's just so classical. And just to sing some of these hymns that were so far from back in the day, just with so much rich history there. So the preacher, from what I understand, the guy that I talked with on the phone, the 10 a.m. guy, he was actually semi-retired. I think he was about 94 is what they told me. And he had served at this church for 40 years. So nowadays they bring in a lot of guest speakers. So the guest speaker for this day sounds like he was kind of more a seminary student, and he was training the dogs. So he had to bring the German Shepherds with him. And he was dressed almost exactly like Clark Kent from the Superman comics and TV shows. He was dressed kind of like this with a tie, and then he had the glasses, and then he had the slick gelled over hair. So he gave a sermon, and what was interesting with his sermon is he preached from Acts 2, all of it, all 47 verses. So he led the sermon by reading the entire Acts 2 book, which is not short. I think he's kind of learning how to give sermons, so it went quite longer than it needed to be. Even the German Shepherds kind of got to the point of, oh, we are getting bored. So one of them started whining and would get on stage. And again, he was preaching sermon, but he also was training the dogs and giving them commands, which was so interesting. So I kind of learned, despite how well behaved these dogs were, it can be quite a distraction, even for myself, to kind of see what they were doing, because as they were getting more bored, they started to wrestle with each other. One even just decided to come in my pew and just would sit right next to me and, lick my hand and just look for attention. So really good boys overall. After this, and with this sermon, I can't really remember a whole lot about it, other than he had an iPad, and he showed us this Louis Giglio sermon. And the sermon, I guess, is a very famous one where he essentially gives a sermon listening to sounds. So the sounds are supposed to be a sound of God creating the heavens and the earth from what it sounds like. I need to do some research on that sermon myself. So we're listening to this, and it almost sounds like whale sounds. But the way that the pastor kind of incorporated it was like we are so small, we are so insignificant, and often in today's day and age, like we are just simply not in awe of God anymore. So after the service, I got talking with a few congregation members and learned a little bit more about the history. And they said, yeah, take a look at anything that you want. They even actually requested me to ring their church bell a few times. So I did that. That was kind of a neat little experience. And just really immersed myself to understand this church and what it was all about and what this did for Kansas and overall what this colony did for a good cause by abolishing slavery. After everyone had left, I stayed back to take a few pictures of the church. And almost immediately, I took maybe one picture, I see this red streak just whistle by on my left. And it's like, oh boy, here we go again. And it's like I had driven 10 hours to go to this church and then another 10 hours driving back home. I saw 2 blue jays, but I didn't see a single cardinal. Only here. It flew to this bush area, and I was trying to get pictures of it, but just due to the shadows, I couldn't really get a good visual on it, but I knew it was there. So as I would get closer, then I saw another one. It's like, is there 2 of them? I saw a third one that was a female one, and they were almost kind of like flying back and forth. So I felt so ridiculous. It's like I don't know how else to put it. It's like I know there's something there. Could it be spiritual? I think it is at this point. And I get a visual of one in this bush area. Another one just kind of flies off. And then I see a third one inside as well. And it's like I had to keep my camera on me at all times because I didn't know when they were going to fly out. They were just 3 or 4 of them at least. And I just couldn't believe it again as this carnal aspect of this church journey continues. So I think for this one, to me, the sermon was about being in awe of God. And to me, like, even though this is a relatively small thing, it shouldn't be anything. It shouldn't be anything to sway faith. To see a sign like this continue in this church journey, I'm in awe myself. And as small as it is, like, I think us as Christians, like, we need to be in awe of so many different smaller things in our lives. For me, this is it's like, I don't get it, but again, this is something where I was praying to God afterwards, and I'm like, I don't know how you keep doing this, but I appreciate it. That's going to wrap up week 40. For next week, I already made the visit Belgian roadside chapels. These are tiny churches that are scattered all throughout the northeast part of Wisconsin. So I visited a bunch of these, and it's quite interesting I want to learn more about the backstories on some of these. So stay tuned for that for next week's video. But if you like these videos, make sure to like and subscribe. But until next time, hope you have a good one.